The One God. Chapter 3. Debates. It seemed like an age since we had walked to that market stall. It seemed like centuries since we had been led from there to a meeting with Paul. Paul, what a man he was! The fire in his bones was visible and almost palpable. Here was a man who truly believed, a man who gave respect and got it, a man which I am now honoured, not only to call a friend, but the much more personal term of a brother. It was a meeting which changed my life. He was a humble man, much more than I was led to believe by the reports I had heard of him. He had no outstanding looks or features. It is silly to describe him so, but his physical body was not what left the impression of him. It was deeper than that. The very air around him seemed to buzz with his selfness. He was completely aware of who and what he was. His every breath reinforced the sense that there was a man who truly knew what it meant to be him. He was completely fulfilled, and yet he was not just him. He was. There is no gentler way to put it. I felt a mere afterthought in his presence, as if I were the lie and my life were a shadow, and he the true light come into it. It was intoxicating. When I asked him about this, his reply was simply that he was no longer alone. All that it was him was tied to another, this Christ of whom he repeatedly spoke. It was as if they were no longer two separate beings, but now were one, a Christ Paul. How wonderful and marvellous did this seem, to be fully you but fully another at the same time. It boggled my logic, it shattered my science. For too long we Atlanteans had relied on only the logic and the rules of the universe. For too long we had seen only the half-truth of this world. Yes, science has its place. Yes, logic and reason have theirs, but that is not the whole truth. It is part of the truth, but not the whole. How can we call ourselves complete if we ignore the fact that there are things that are unexplainable, things which are beyond our limitations, our perceptions? It is in striving for these things, in ever expanding, that the truth lies. For truth is not stagnant, not some point that one can point to and say, there lies the truth now and forever. No, truth is ever moving, ever growing, and in our quest to remain with it, so must we. Here in Paul, I found the answer I had so long been seeking. Now I needed to figure out how to make everyone else see it too. Our greeting at our return was short. Both Augustus and I had much to arrange if we were to hold Senate before leaving. It was a matter of 2 days before we all gathered in the great domed hall of the Senate chamber, aboard the ship. There had been much grumbling at the delay. All were eager to go, and the ship's charge had depleted, meaning we would have to do another charging run before leaving. The Senate hall was abuzz with murmuring, the marble walls resounding with the voice of hundreds of senators, each seated according to their political affiliation, colours of cloaks representing which affiliation we held to at the time. I myself had donned a gold cloak, and was now sitting alongside Augustus and my cousin Gaius. Nartinia took the stand reserved for him as emperor, and Matthias was 2 seats to my right, all of us in gold. A senator dressed in violet stood. "Are we to understand that the reason for this meeting is to hear child's fables?" he said with a sneer on his face. There was an uproar in the house, and Nartinia held up his hand to quiet the hall. I could see Augustus clench his hand next to me. "You are here to hear the testimony of Maximus and Augustus, 2 of this kingdom's most loyal and respected members. Are there any objections?" Nartinia said. A senator dressed in black stood. "I move that this can wait till we are on a path to the new world. All in favour?" A flurry of hands rose at this, mostly from the black and violet-robed senators. Fortunately, there were not enough to delay it. "We shall continue then. General Augustus, Grand Vizier Maximus, the podium is yours." We spent most of the day recounting all that we had seen and heard, until at last the time for questions had arrived. Immediately, one with a yellow robe stood and pointed to me. In the Hebrew fable of creation, God took 6 days to create the universe. If he was truly all-powerful, why not create it all at once? Mutterings filled the hall at this. A good question, my friend. I took a deep breath and sent prayers up to the Lord God for guidance. If you could instantly create a piece of art, would you value it as much as one that had taken you a lot of effort and time to make? Would it have the same meaning and history present in it as one that had taken all your effort and considerable time? No, you would place far greater value on that which took time, care, and effort to make, not wishing it harm, and sheltering it from those who would do it harm. It is the same with the Lord. His works are many and great, and his ways are wise. If he created all things at once, we would have no unique value, no intrinsic sense of worth. For if all things were instant, they would have no value or worth. Instead, he did all things in order that we understand their worth, creating that first which was most base, such as light, sky, and earth, and from there creating that which was most spirit-filled, such as the beasts and man. Likewise, though that which was most spirit-filled cannot survive without those below it, and in this God's glory was made and is made manifest. Just because one can do something doesn't mean that one should. Immediately after I finished, a man in a black cloak stood, saying, "You make the claim that this God values his creation. Yet then why would he allow suffering and strife amongst them?" I struggled with this one as well, I replied. The Lord Jesus is open about the fact that suffering is a part of this world. In fact, a quote of his I learned from Paul is that God allows the sun to shine on both the just and the unjust, and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. If this were not the case, one would have no basis for choice. If good things only happen to good people and bad things only happen to bad people, then truth of choice would be irrelevant. As to have a true choice of ways, one must have a measure of faith. Now faith is the belief in God to do you good. The other necessity is fear, which is belief in the adversity to do you wrong. If you were never done wrong to, you would have no fear, and therefore you would have no choice. If you had no choice, you would have no free will, and if you had no free will, we would be mindless. At this there was much uproar, as many tried to speak at once. Nartinia once again rose his hand, and silence was found. Again one rose, this one in a gold robe, such as mine own, and said to Augustus, "I have a problem with the idea of God. If you can answer me it, then I shall believe whatever you both say. If God does exist, how does he routinely defy the laws of the universe?" Augustus smiled and looked at Tarsanus. "Oh, that such a question would come from you, my friend, that routinely pushes the limits of discovery even further than we thought possible. It is true what is said, in seeing they do not perceive, and in hearing they do not understand. But you, for your faith and longing to be of complete understanding, I shall give this answer unto you. Now there was a man who after a long journey came home, only to find his possessions taken from him. All that he had toiled for and saved were now no longer his, but were now in the possession of another. Seeing this, and lamenting much, he went straight forth unto the king of the land, and said unto him, All that I worked for has been taken from me. I know not what I can do. The king in his wisdom sent men to the apartment, and discovering pieces of evidence, traced them down until the man that had taken these things from them, and brought the man before the king. Upon seeing the king, this man fell to his face and said, I did this thing, since within my understanding there was no law preventing me from doing it. The king, much enraged, rose and said to the man, You wicked, wicked servant, have I not made the laws of my kingdom public, and much announced them? Have I not set the boundaries of my kingdom in firm place, and enforced the law? Throw this man out into the darkness, and let him re-enter not. The king turned to the man, who had his things stolen from him, and said, This man's possessions shall be given unto you, and your own returned unto you. For I am the king, and my word is law. Augustus bowed his head and continued, It is the same with God. He has established and made clear the laws we act under. But over all, he is the Lord and King, and thus is free to create higher laws through his word. Tarsanus smiled and said, Thank you. I perceive and understand. He then sat, and Nartinia called for a break. As I was getting up from my seat, I looked at Gaius. He had his head in his hands, and he was visibly shaking. "Are you all right?" I asked him. He didn't respond. "Gaius!" I said louder, shaking him. Yes, Maximus, Maximus, do you really believe all of this?" he asked. "More than anything I've ever believed, cousin. Now, come, let's go get some lunch." It was a restful lunch. All of us retired to our families' cabins in order to unwind and spend some time with them. My gorgeous wife and loving son greeted me at the door, with Liarin jumping into my arms. My mind was buzzing with thoughts of the Senate. "How did it go, Maximus?" asked Nidara, her hand finding mine. She had been a quick convert, with her saying, "If anyone would have made sure of his facts before believing, it would have been you, dear." I felt my heart warm at her words. "It went well, I think, although so many of them are reluctant." I sighed. "I suppose that it is understandable, though. They have held to their beliefs for so long. It is hard to let them go. I had the advantage of many years of study before I met Paul." It was all too soon that lunch was finished, and I had to return to the closed-in dome of the Senate. Halfway down the hall to the Senate chamber, though, I heard blood-curdling screams. I ran ahead and flung open the doors that led to my Senate seat. Before me was a horrible sight. Gaius was hanging from the roof of the Senate, a rope around his neck, and a sign around his body, with the words, "I hold no responsibility," in hastily written writing. I felt a depth of sorrow. I felt a sorrow, the depths of which are still difficult for me to fathom. What had caused my cousin to do this? Why would such a brilliant man as he refuse to accept my words and have a reaction like this instead? I fell to my knees, threw my hands to the sky, and cried out. The meetings were cancelled for the rest of the day, with time made to bury Gaius's body in the ground outside the ship. I had a fitful sleep that night, Nidara holding me and crying along with me. It was a few days more till the council reconvened after the suicide of my cousin. Everyone was shaken, with many demanding that the talk of belief be banned if this were its consequence. I satisfied myself with the study of writings we had obtained from Paul, and found peace for my soul therein. Nartinia visited me on the second day, and we talked long into the night. He left with his eyes shining and a smile upon his face. At this time another came to me whose name was Seth. He was earnest in his desire to learn more of the message, and how he might gain more knowledge thereof. He was a quick study, and, although young, a kindred spirit. Others came to me and joined the Gold faction. All in all, we were myself, Maximus Menextra, Nartinia Kentria, Matthias Nare, Augustus Jule, Loktar Hempstead, Mikael Darnest, Seth Tarste, and Masake Duren. The 8 of us met regularly during the next few days, consulting and learning from one another. It was at this time that Loktar, having a liking for such things, made a compilation of all the knowledge of the Hebrews and the knowledge of the disciples and Paul that we had managed to gather. It was bound into one document and released shipwide for all to read. They called it the text. The number of copies accessed by the people was staggering, with one copy being in almost every cabin. The response, though, was more divided, with the majority agreeing, but a very vocal minority bringing up perceived issues with the text. It was over a month before the council reconvened, and it was a short one, with the decision being an overwhelming majority to keep the text available for all who would read it, and for those who would, to follow its teachings. With this, the ship was now ready to begin its charging once again.